Is somebody offering you a deal to take a position at a shop? Um, Come join the outfit and we're going to hand you some RSUs, or we're going to give you some ISOs, or we're going to give you equity grants. And you're like, what the heck is all this? I'm sitting there. I want to be a pro coder. I want to get paid for my efforts. I want to earn money. What does all this stuff mean? I don't know. I've heard that options are great, or I've heard that they're worthless, or something in the middle, and you just want to understand what the heck is going on. Um, and it's kind of like, I think about it like when Seinfeld described shopping for fruit. It seems like everybody around you understands, and for you, you just kind of have to fake it and act like you know what you're doing. He says this bit about when you go shopping for fruit, you just have to act like you know what you're doing. So for fun, go and sit there and try to thump, you're like everyone else is thumping melons, trying to figure out if they're ripe. And it's like, does that even work? I don't know. So for fun, just go roll it down the aisle and say, well, I see the way that one's breaking to the right. That one's still kind of green. So it's a funny bit. So it almost feels like in the land of options and grants and equity and stuff, you just kind of got to pretend like you know what's going on. So I'm hoping I can help dispel some of that and clarify what some of the terminology is when it comes to stock options, so you can at least make a better informed decision about your potential hiring. What's what's happening? What's going to be the deal here? Now I'm going to open this one up with a big giant disclosure. I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a lawyer or any of that stuff. This is for educational purposes, and this is definitely not investment advice. Okay. I'm not going to tell you whether or not to go exercise your options or how to do that. So please consult your accountant, your tax attorney, any financial advisor, what have you, before making any decisions about what to do with your money or your compensation. All right. Got that out of the way. Caveats everywhere. Let's start off. I kind of deliberately like grabbed every acronym I could think of and threw it out there. But let's talk about some terminology. What are stock options? Well, let's go right to the heart of that option. What it means is it's a contract that you get handed. The you're the receiver of the contract, and whoever gives that contract to you, in this case, an employer, they're giving you the option to buy stock somewhere in the future. Contracts have lots of terms in them, but fundamentally, they're saying we're not just handing you the stock now, we're giving you the opportunity to purchase it sometime in the future. This is the option, meaning you don't have to do it, but you can do it. And a lot of the times people get hung up on the dollar amounts when also it's important to understand all the terms in your contract. If somebody gives you an option, they're not just handing it to you carte blanche. There's going to be a bit of paperwork that you're going to sign and agree to through some brokerage house, and it has a listing of all the terms. Okay. So I'm going to first talk about some of the types of stock options that companies hand out. And then we're going to go into, how does this work? How does this operate? How do you navigate this stuff? There's been kind of two major types of options that I've seen in my career in about the past 14 years. The company I worked at before that didn't do options at all. Instead, they had what they called a profit sharing program. At the end of the year, they would essentially tally up how much cash they're going to hand out, and they handed you a piece of money. It was sort of like a bonus. So it wasn't baked into your compensation package. It was just profit sharing. But then I went to a different company and I got handed stock options. So there's one version called an incentive stock option, or an ISO. Okay, this is not the International Standards Organization, like ISO 9001. This is just an acronym for what they do is they hand you, and in the contract it says you will have the option to exercise. I've got to turn that off. OS 10, you're crazy. Do you heart your ISOs? That is, you can buy it. It says in the contract you'll have the option to buy maybe 1,000 shares, however many shares they pick, this many shares for this price at this date or later. So there's going to have a quantity of shares. It's typically going to be the stock of the company that you're working for, their stock. How many shares is it for a given price on a certain date? So it may say that in this option, you get 25% of the shares are going to become available 12 months from your signing date. And it's the option to purchase them at a price. And it may say something like $20 a share. It's option to buy. Now, what does that What does that mean? Why are you giving me something to buy? I thought you're trying to give me money. How does this work? The idea is that they're handing you the option to buy the shares at $20. And what you're hoping for is that at the day the shares become available to exercise, the day that you have the opportunity to buy those shares at 20, you're hoping they're selling for 40 on the stock exchange. Because all you do is it's your contractual right to buy them at 20 and sell them at 40. Now let's go back to that example that I said, 1,000 shares. 1,000 shares at $20. That means you need to pay $20,000, and you're going to turn around and sell it for 40, which would be 40,000. So after you pay off the 20, you're left with $20,000 in profit, and that's the compensation that you've been handed. And that's kind of it in a nutshell what a stock option is. Okay, it's contractual authority to purchase shares at one price, and your plan is to sell it for a higher price. But if the price, maybe the market opens that day and the shares are at $10. Well, do I want to pay 20 to sell for 10? No, because then I would lose money. And that's the fundamentals of what stock options are. We got some people already on the channel hopping in. Don says, "Good morning, Greg." Hey, Don, good to see you here. Glad you came to join the Pro Coder Show today. We can learn about equity grants. Now, feel free to post it in the comments, whichever platform you're on. We're broadcasting everywhere: YouTube, X, LinkedIn, Rumble, you name it. Go ahead and post. Share. Do you currently have options? And you can add the bonus and say, "I don't understand any of it. It is really confusing." So I talked about incentive stock options. That's where they in your contract it says you can buy it at one price and sell it at another. Well, something that they kind of seem to have done a lot more of in the past maybe 10 years or so is they've come out with something else called an RSU. Have you heard of RSUs in your option, or has your company talked about it if you have options? So so there's something called an RSU is known as a restricted stock unit, okay? And it behaves kind of like a different animal. Now, I just mentioned that example of you have this option of 1,000 shares where you can buy at 20, and the hope is sell at 40 or sell at 100. Wow. Um, but what if it opens at 10? Well, then you're just not going to exercise it. You're not going to exercise it in that situation, are you? You're gonna be like, I'm not going to do it. I'm gonna I'm gonna wait for the stock price to recover. That's typically what you do. Is you're waiting for the price to come back up to where you can make some profit, and the profit is the difference there. So you're waiting for option for the price to recover. Well, what generated a bad taste in many people's mouths is there's a lot of companies that would say, okay, come and join our shop. We're going to pay you, here's the X amount of salary we're going to pay you, and we're going to sweeten the deal, we're going to offer you these options. And some of them they overvalued them. The When they finally got it started off typically as part of startup companies. Startup companies are like, well, we have a limited amount of capital, we've raised funds, we'd rather pour that into the business rather than just handing the cash directly to the. We want to give them fair compensation, but we don't want to overdo it. So maybe what we can do is hold back on the salary a little bit, and instead offer them a piece of the company. Is fundamentally what stock is a stock. A stock symbol is a representation of ownership of the company. You own a piece of the company when you own a share of a company. Okay. So they're like, well, maybe we can give them a piece of the company. And when we go public, when we get ourselves listed on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, what have you, and we go public, and when our company is so successful and takes off, they can own part of that upside and catch that on the options. Well, in differing things, like you had the dot-com bubble back in 2000, and then you had the other market correction in 2008. Some companies would IPO and start at this price, and maybe they'd set the option price here, but somehow the stock price tumbled for other external factors. Maybe they overvalued the options, so people were left with options they couldn't, or not that they couldn't exercise, that they wouldn't exercise, because you're not going to exercise an option that loses money. And so the other thing is that I mentioned there's terms in there about when the option becomes available to you to exercise, is what it is when you're going to go take the option and use it as per your contractual authority. That's called exercising your option. Um, and so when you do that, you're cashing in a sense. Well, there's a date when that starts, but there's also an expiration date. That option is not a doesn't last for the rest of your life. They'll typically put something on there, like they'll make it where the option's good for 4 years or 8 years or 10 years. Okay. So the company doesn't want to have an eternal liability on their books. They want to have here's a window. It starts on this day, but it ends on that day. So this is the time window in which you need the company stock to move from here to here. And some people's options they joined a company, they helped it get it to the point where it went public, and then their options expired worthless. And so this promise didn't come through. So yeah, I didn't sit in on the meetings where they designed all this stuff necessarily, but it seems to me as if there was a sort of an evolution towards what's called the restricted stock unit, or the RSU. An RSU fundamentally looks very similar, but what they say is we're just giving you these shares. Now there's still terms associated with it. You have an RSU that's like, okay, here's 1,000 shares of this company. We're going to give it to you on this date, and you have until this date to sell them. But it doesn't have the same phenomena of the what's called the exercise, or they call it the strike price. Your option to buy the share. What did I say? Buy it at 20 and sell it at 40. The buying price is known as the strike price. An RSU doesn't have the strike price like that. Okay. So there's no, I'm waiting for the market to get above or where the market's below that. They just hand you shares at that point in time. And they say, you now have 1,000 shares. It's your option to sell them or hold on to them. So in this context, you're no longer trying to sell for a differential. They're just worth whatever the share price is. Now, the subtle thing in all that is basically, let's back it up. The whole point of this is the company's trying to hand you a form of compensation. Okay. They're trying to say, we're going to hand you a certain amount of money, but we're not just handing you the cash. Instead, we're going to give it to you in the form of stock. We're the owners of the company. We can dispense however much stock we want to, whatever they want to decide to do. So they can sit there and say, our plan is to hand you $20,000 of compensation. Right now, we say the fair market, we've assessed it, and the fair market value is $20 a share. So we're going to write into this contract, you get 1,000 shares. 1,000 times 20, $20,000. When this option vests, we're going to hand you 1,000 shares that you can go and sell right away. Now, they budgeted, in this example, they budgeted $20,000 to give you in the form of 1,000 shares. You get the shares. You don't have to per se buy them. You have them. They're already yours, but they're restricted in what you can do with them according to the terms. But let's imagine that scenario where it was $20, it was $20 a share at the point when they picked it out for you. But the day you get to exercise them, the price has gone up to 40. You can sell them at 40 and you're going to get $40,000. Now, there's no difference. You're not keeping the $20,000 profit. You keep the 40,000 in that situation. If the price opened at $10 a share and you exercise the 1,000 options, you're going to get $10,000. So in that situation, there's no risk of I'm going to lose 10,000, or I'm not going to exercise them. In that situation, you're like, do I want to sell this or not? Maybe today the price is at 20, but I have a hunch that it's going to go to 30 in the next 3 months. You can sit there and wait as long as it's within your window and decide to sell it later, wait for it to go up, or it may go down. You don't know what's going to happen. And so that's where RSUs are a little different. It's like they've handed you shares, but they still have some terms, but it doesn't have that same price differential thing that may make you ultimately never sell them. All right. I love this. We got Don's watching live on YouTube. And if you've got a question, go ahead and throw it into the comments. It'll come through to me. I'll just tell you this right now. If you're on YouTube and super chat it, your question goes to the top of the list. So you had the ISOs, and I say they've been around for a long time. Like I'd heard about those, long before I became a pro coder. I'd heard of these kind of options, and it's only when I got into the thing and was offered some kind of package that I started to unravel what they were. But it seems like the RSU thing has kind of risen up in the past 10 years. So for all I know, they've been around longer than that. It just may be my own observational bias at play here, but it seems like a more guaranteed way for the company to hand you a piece of compensation and for you to not per se get shortchanged by a price differential like that. But there's some other factors at play when we're talking about stock options. Now, before I go into more of that, let's talk a little bit more about what is stock anyway? We hear about this, but basically, I mean, what is it? Essentially, stocks trading stocks was sort of invented as a mechanism for companies to raise funds. Okay. It used to be if you invented a new business, you had a great idea, but you needed to go buy materials to go manufacture your product, and you didn't have all the cash yourself. So you could go out to friends and family, whomever, and say, "Hey, could if I can get $10,000 from these 10 people, now I've got $100,000 and I can start manufacturing my product." And you would give them a piece. You would give them a promise them a portion of future profits. That's kind of what it means, to raise funds. You sit there and do that. You go, and this is what a lot of like private businesses do. They need to go do series funding. They can either go to friends and family and raise stuff, or there's other whole companies that are dedicated on shopping out and figuring out who they're going to invest in. But it's a lot of work to go do that. I mean, can you imagine sitting there picking up the phone and calling 100 different people, hoping to get one person to say, "Oh, okay, I'll buy into that." Um, we're talking about is a private company that's trying to raise funds. Well, they came up with the idea of the stock market as a way to come out and say, we want to give everybody a chance. The entire public has a chance to chip in and help us raise funds. And so that's the first time you go public and let anybody purchase the shares of your company is called why it's called the initial public offering, because that's the first time anybody can come buy stock. Now it's kind of ironic to say that, because usually in today's world, when a company IPOs or goes public and starts selling stock, it's usually like institutional banks and stuff that are getting first dibs. They're the ones that per se get the first invitations, but it gets on the stock market, and then it's like they're basically first paying money to the company saying they want a piece of the company. And when you hold a piece of the company, when you're holding a stock certificate, you get certain rights. You get certain authorities as a stock owner. The first thing is you get to vote on who the top level management is. Typically, that's who the board is. You get to vote for the board members, and the board often is the people that then pick like who their CEO is or their CTO is, that kind of stuff. So you're kind of voting for who's on the board. And so the way they do it is the company says we're gonna distribute 1 million shares, and for $10 a share, you then every share you get gives you a vote. So you're buying a vote to control who's running the company at the top. And that's one of the first features you get with owning a stock. Okay. One of the other things that often happens is that a stock-based company, basically they collect all they collect all the money, all the revenue throughout the year. They pay all the bills. They have to go pay the staff, all the people that work for them. They pay those bills. They have to pay all their vendors, all the third parties that they've made deals with. Whatever is left over at the end of the year after paying everything that's due is the profit. And then the company decides what it's going to do with the profit. And one of the things that it can do, it can set some aside in the bank. It could say, we did very well this year. Let's put aside 10% in the bank. They can take a piece of it. They can reinvest it in the company and say, let's hire more people and try to grow the company. Or they can do something they can declare a dividend. Well, all the people that own the company, all the stockholders, we're going to reward them by paying them a dividend. And so they can take however much dividend that they have, and they can divide it amongst all the shareholders, and you can get a piece of compensation for holding shares in a stock. So when the company hands you a stock option, there's different ways for you to exercise that. And the simplest is fundamentally, it's an option to buy the stock. So they hand you 1,000 units in your option, and maybe today the price is at $20 a share when you have the authority to purchase. You can hand them $20,000 It goes into the company, and now you're a shareholder. You own 1,000 shares, and now you get to vote on stuff. Now, they also, some of the companies have different ones. They'll have like a Series A or Series B share, and it's only like or preferred or common stock. And it's the preferred stock holders that actually get to do the voting. And they can have different prices for that. So it may be that the A shares are who votes for management, but B is for the dividend people. And sometimes it's exclusive and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the A people get to vote and get dividends, or it's the A people get to vote and the B people get dividends. It just depends on the company. But you can fundamentally just pay the money because it's your option to buy the stock, and now you own part of the company and you get to vote on things like that. Sometimes in their bylaws they have things like if they do something over a certain dollar amount, they have to get the stock owners to vote for it. And they'll send out, you start getting paper in the mail. You may get the alerts about, hey, there's the annual meeting's coming up, get ready to vote, and they have to send you paperwork.
If you're enjoying the show, give it a big thumbs up and share it with a friend right now.
So when you have this, that's the immediate thing you can do is you can just exercise, you can just buy your options, but that's usually the least used option because most people receiving it are looking for the compensation factor. Now you may be saying, I want to sell this, I want to cash in on this, I want to get my money out of this, but I don't have $20,000 to buy the stock with. What do I do now? Well, just about every brokerage firm that supports doing stock options, they all do this. They have something available to you called a same-day trade. They may call it something subtly different, but fundamentally it says, I want to buy the option and then turn around and sell it immediately. I want to do it all at once. Don't demand money from me. I want to collect the difference, and they do that for you. So you're kind of at no risk. Now, you need to look at the fine print. I cannot guarantee this, but I think they treat it as an atomic transaction, but I don't know this for sure. So you've been warned, because some of these crazy days, there's days where the stock market like drops ridiculous, on the same day. I don't know if same day trades are protected from those or not, because there's a chance that you buy it and then it drops and then you sell it. And are you still at risk for having to pay the difference if it was negative? I don't know. That's also not a risk if you're talking about RSUs that we mentioned. If it's pure RSUs, all you do is just sell. But the old-fashioned stuff, the ISOs, that the incentive stock options, where you have the differential, you could exercise what's called a same-day trade. And so it lets you basically pocket the difference. And that was the thing I used. That was the option I used the most when I had those types of options. Now they have something else called an option you can exercise to buy. I love it that, in pro coding, we have all these weird phrases and acronyms and stuff. You go to finance, they have their own vocabulary. So it's like there's an element of you need to go learn this stuff. But exercise to buy says, I want to do enough same day trades. I want to buy enough options such that when I sell them, there's enough proceeds to then buy the rest of the lot. So you can sit there and say, well, I have 1,000 shares in the option, and I want to get 100 shares. What do I do? I want to turn 100 of those into company shares that I hold on to. What do I need to do? Exercise to buy will sit there and do the computation. Will essentially say, well, you need to exercise 58 shares. You need to do 58 same day trades, such that will yield enough cash to then buy those 100 shares. So when it's all said and done, you're holding on to 100 shares of company stock, but it cost you 158 options. So you're down to 842. So you started with 1,000 and nothing. At the end of it, you have 100 shares of the company and 842 options left to exercise. Is that clear as mud? So that was something else you could do. Is like, I want to sell and I want to exercise enough of it to get a hold of it. And sometimes you can sit there and say, I want to do it. I want to do the whole lot. Um, Stock options come in chunks and they're called lots. And also you get a lot, like they hand you this chunk, but there's also a lot when you say I want to sell a lot, not sell lots, like a lot of like a piece of land is not called a lot. Well, shares you can exercise typically on the floor of the stock exchange are done in chunks of 100 shares. But you can be handed in this chunk, you get 482 shares or option shares. But again, exercise to buy is something when you have the price differential. If it's just RSUs, you don't do that because you already have the shares fundamentally. Now, something else to clarify, at least in the United States, if you get option, anytime you get cash, anytime you get money out of doing these trades where essentially you're exercising your option or you're selling RSUs, it's treated as ordinary income. Okay. If you don't know what that means, basically it's treated with the same classification as if you had gotten that through your regular day job. We call that in the United States, we call that W-2 income, stuff that shows up on your W-2 tax filing. I can't tell you what this looks like in, say, Canada or Mexico or the EU or the UK or what have you. So this is again why you need to, consult with your attorney. And it helps if you have an accountant who actually knows about options and stuff to coach you on this stuff. But typically, anytime you make money off stock options, it's treated as regular income and taxed at your marginal tax rate. So perhaps you make, your salary puts you in this bracket. If you're exercising options, it can push you into the next tax bracket. So it's something to be aware of. So you may want to say, well, I need to strategically, I'm only going to exercise this many because this keeps me in this tax bracket. And maybe this extra piece that I wanted to do, I'll wait until the next year. So it goes into the next tax year. So this is where you need to have a plan and consult with your accountant to think about that. Now, I mentioned terms. There's it's a contract. When you get a stock option, it's loaded with terms and you need to read them all. There's no reason to not read that document. Because what about if you do something like you leave the company? What are your rights and authorities in that situation? Well, typically, if you leave a company, any rights and privileges that you possess are surrendered at the door. When you walk out the door, you're giving up your salary, whatever they're paying you there. You're giving up your bonus. If your company's paying you bonus, you're giving up the right to receive any profit sharing program when you walk out the door. Well, guess what? If you have any options on the books, you're giving those up too. Now they put extra terms in there. For example, on a stock option, it's not uncommon for them to say, okay, you have 30 days from the point of termination, from the point of departure, whatever, to exercise any remaining options. They typically give you some kind of window like that because one of the things is the options show up in your brokerage account under your name, but they're governed by contractual provisions from the company. So even though it's in your account, the contractual privileges from the company, the brokerage house can still take those away because according to the terms of the contract. So if you quit your job, they may say something like you have 30 days or you have 90 days to exercise your options. Okay. And you need to decide, what are you going to do? If you're in that situation where it's gone negative, hey, it was at 20 and it's now down to 10. And it's one of those situations you may have to watch it. You may have to watch that every day until the term expires in case it goes up and you can hit the sell button. Or you may have to let it go. And this is also, the situation of, I said if you leave, but it also is if you're terminated or laid off. Something to share with you is because I was let go at the end of November. I had received an equity grant. When I say equity grant, that's just another word for stock option. It means they gave me a contract for stuff, and they gave it to. I got awarded that last June. It was an option credit, and I really appreciate my manager going to bat for me to earn that because he had put in a good word on my behalf. But one of the things that contract said, and it had a term, and that it said if you happen to be let go in the acquisition, you are entitled to 25% of the option with full acceleration. Now, something I've kind of mentioned a few times is there's a term of, here's when you can start exercising it, and here's the end of your option. You have this time frame, but shares are it's typically not a factor of you get them all right now on this date. Typically they've done different strategies. The most common one I've seen is on the 12-month anniversary of the option grant, you get 25% vested. That means 25% you own. You can start exercising your contractual privileges against 25% of the shares on that date. And then they'll do something like, and then for the next 3 years after that, the remaining bit will be doled out on a per month basis. So then each month after that, you're getting little pieces of option vested to your account. So I got an equity grant, and it said, if you're let go in the acquisition, you're entitled to 25%. And it said full acceleration, which means whatever the term schedule is, it's brought into then and there. And I think it said on the day of severance. So I got laid off on the end of November, and my final date was like January 26th. So that was 2 months later, December, January. Yeah. So 2 months later, and it had a complex formula of how they would tally what the actual exercise price was or something like that, with what value. So basically, in that thing, it said they were going to exercise 25%. They were RSUs. So it's like essentially we're going to sell them on your behalf on this date, according to this metric. This is how we're going to compute the price so that it doesn't look unfair in any way. And so you understood. So it's like I lost 75% of the grant, but they could have kept it all. They could have canceled the whole thing, but instead they at least gave me 25%. And this is why it's so important to go read the terms. Okay. You've got to read the terms on this stuff, or you're gonna be left hanging. I had missed the part where it said 25%, and my eyes locked on to where it said full acceleration. And I was thinking, I'm gonna get it all. Nope, 25%. So that's the thing. Now, what are the incentives that they do this for? Like, why this really is complicated. It's like, if it's melting your brain, give the video a thumbs up, or uh, like it on the where you're watching it from. But if it's melting your brain, let's hear it in the comments, because this is a lot of stuff for just handing somebody compensation. Well, it's really fundamentally an alternative to handing you cash. Okay. The company could just hand you some money and they could hand it out, but it's almost easier that they can write these contracts and dole it out and let the brokerage houses handle it. But there's surely cost for them to have to fiddle with brokerage houses doing this. So why do they do it? Well, there's some ancillary benefits that essentially they'll tell you it's an incentive to encourage you to work harder. It's to say, to basically it aligns your objectives with the company's objectives. The company wants to be successful and profitable. And if part of your compensation is tied to the company's success, it makes you want to make the company be successful. You want to provide the best services to the customers. You want to develop the best products. That's what it is right there. So I put air quotes around that, to work harder, but it actually, it does that. So you're like, well, if I'm a slouch and just sort of do the minimum, then I don't know, maybe we won't do as well. But if all of us are kind of pulling along, saying, what can we do to make things better, to improve the product? What can we amplify this? Because the better the company does, the better I'm going to do. So, on a fundamental level, that makes sense. But there's another reason that they do this. The companies will do this kind of thing, and it's an incentive for you to stay on board. I just talked about how if you leave, if you perhaps somebody comes and lures you away to another shop, what you have to realize, to accept somebody else's offer, you're letting go of all the equity that this company's giving you. It's one thing to say, well, this company has given me an option that at today's fair market value is worth maybe $10,000. That's a nice lump sum. That's a nice bunch of money. But what if they've given you something that's worth perhaps $1 million or $500,000, something like that? Well, are you going to walk away from that? No, maybe I'm going to stay here. Maybe I'm willing to stay here for an extra 3 years or something to see what happens, to see what the odds of that are. And so now, anytime you're looking at looking at opportunities that pop up to go somewhere else, you have to factor that in. You're not going to walk away as if that was nothing. I've had headhunters hitting me up for it seems like within a year of joining VMware, I've had headhunters seeking me out, saying, we've got opportunities here, we've got opportunity there. And I was like, I have an equity grant sitting on the table. It's like, is this other outfit ready to buy that out? Are they willing to either give me sufficient salary to meet that, or a comparable equity position at the new company, or a signing bonus, something like that? This option that I'm holding with my current company is worth something. What is it worth? And this caused an expression to arise back in the 70s called the golden handcuffs. So in a sense, it sort of handcuffs you to your current job, but it's a sweet prize to it. So that's why people know this as the golden handcuffs. And I mean, there's truth to that. The other thing is for cash-strapped companies, cash-strapped startups, they may have raised a bunch of funds. They want to be very judicious in how they use the capital. If they're going to hand you out a bonus check this year, well, by golly, what happens if they don't hand you the same bonus check the next year and the year after that and the year after that? There's going to be revolt. Even if it's for a tiny amount of money, if they handed everybody just $1,000 as a bonus amount, and maybe you're thinking, either you think that's like a great amount of money, or you may think that's kind of a small amount. But if they hand you a bonus check like that, they need to start handing that out every year, or it's going to look bad. And they're like, well, can we afford that? We just raised this money. We'd rather go invest in these areas and not just be handing the cash out directly, because then it just becomes like, well, we've just automatically given everyone a pay raise. Is there a more efficient way to use the funds that we just raised? So they're cautious at how much they're going to hand out bonus money like that and make it a thing. So instead, they can hand you the option grants. They can hand you this equity grant package. So it's like, well, this kind of aligns your interests with ours. It's a way to give you compensation without actually having to spend the cash that we just raised or that we just took out a big old loan for. We're trying to hold that and be cautious with that so they can do that. And so, initially it was really the startup companies that did that, but it kind of became a norm. And that's why there's a lot of companies, most of them I see more so like on the West Coast or something. It just became a nature. And I actually had run into recruiters that weren't aware, or they were confused that already public companies can hand out stock option grants. It's not just startup companies. I think I was talking to somebody and had mentioned about, well, I worked at VMware and I got, I had some options, and they were like, oh, I thought VMware had gone public. I didn't know it was still a private company. Well, they weren't. They've not been private for years. But options are not just handed out by startup companies. So that's one of the things, if you're shopping at a company or looking at multiple companies, is to evaluate, do they even have options? Are they going to pay me how is my compensation package going to look in this situation? And something else to be aware of is the higher up the ladder you move, the more and more your compensation package is filled in by stock options. So this is why it's important. Maybe if you're just first getting in the industry, it doesn't seem like as big of a deal, because it is important to shore up your salary, the money that you're going to make, because you need to be able to pay for things like your housing, whether that's rent, you're making a mortgage payment or whatnot. See, that's where you need the salary income to kind of ensure that. But if you're moving up to higher and higher level, and you're more getting close to a staffer or a principal engineer at a shop, it's not uncommon at that level that it's like, more than a quarter, a third, a half, 3/4. You get up to like director and stuff. It could be 3/4 of your whole compensation package is this equity grant. And it's not uncommon that the equity grant you get has sort of here's the amount of compensation we're going to give you in this package and all these options. And it's all going to vest it's all going to vest within 4 years. Okay. They'll say, a 4-year package it's going to be this additional compensation for over a 4-year span. Some of the trade-offs with that is it may be a way to get to get a lot of compensation, but it's no guarantee that you're ever going to get any more equity from that company. Some companies hand out equity grants periodically, and some do not. Some companies, that is basically your signing bonus. It's your one-time grant. And it's only once in a blue moon that maybe they have other ones come out. And that's something else to research when you're looking for a shop, is how often am I going to get these equity grants that I have to contend with? I said there's some companies that do it periodically. There's this other thing you can get. Some companies do it and some do not. And it's called an employee stock purchase plan. Now, I told you this is today's episode of the Pro Coder Show is going to be packed with stuff. This is probably a brain melter at all the content here that we're having to cover, but it's something you need to understand so that you can make the best of it. Some companies have what's called a employee stock purchase plan, or ESPP. And what this is you can pick how much you're going to opt in. And sometimes what they limit it to people that have been with the company. You have to have been there for at least 6 months, or it may say you have to have been there within 12 months when the next cycle starts. But what they do is that from a certain time frame, you opt in and say, I want 10% of my paycheck to be put aside in this fund. Okay, it's not a mutual fund. It's a fund. It's an escrow fund where they're gonna save up from your paycheck. Maybe it's 10% of your paycheck. They're going to save up, and at the end of the period, they take all the money that they set aside and they go buy the stock. And they give you, essentially, it's another form of a stock option. They essentially hand you shares of the company. Now, I've been at one where they did that every 6 months. And so the terms are, it's a 6-month period. So even if you missed it, you can catch the next one 6 months later. But they had an option to pick between 5 and 15%. And then they also, you could opt in for up to 15% of your paycheck could be set aside in this plan. And there's more terms. I told you there's always terms. You need to read all the terms. But they would have an upper dollar amount. So, if you're making a huge salary, you probably can't do the 15%. That's too much. And so you can accumulate whatever the limit up to the dollar limit. But they would have a deal where at the period ends at this date. Now, what they would do is they would actually, to assess how many shares you get, they would look at this period and figure out the start and the end of the period. Which one had the lowest price of the stock? And let's say they pick this one. Then it would say, this is the price you're going to buy the shares, but we're going to discount the price 15%. So we're going to take the price, go and deduct 15%. So maybe it was $100 a share on this day, and it was $120 a share on this day. 100 to 120. So they take the 100, they're going to deduct 15. So they're going to buy the shares at $85 a share. That's the 15% discount. They're going to buy them at $85 a share. The whole thing is they're going to hand you all these options based on that. They're going to hand you all these shares based on that. And they'll have bought them at $85 a share, which means you get more than if you bought them today at 120. So you get this 85, and then right then you have the opportunity. You could sell it that day that they hand it to you. And you've made, what's 120 minus 85? A $45 a share bonus. Or you can sit there and hold on to those, and you don't have to sell them that day. You can wait and sell them at some other time, but they have terms. So you have a certain amount of time before you have to exercise them. Some of those they may let you hold on to for, say, up to 10 years. You have 10 years to sell it, that kind of thing. Or like I said, if you leave the company or get terminated, they may give you a window in which to go ahead and sell those and be done and collect your profit. And I talked earlier about, what are stocks? They grant you certain contractual rights to, like, vote on the board and things like that. Typically, shares handed out through options like stock options or employee stock purchase plans typically don't come with those kind of privileges. Okay, it's really purely a compensation mechanism. So you typically you don't get that unless you actually, like RSUs. Typically, you don't get to vote on that stuff. It's only if you're in that situation, able to get the shares moved out of that brokerage account stock plan, and moved into some separate brokerage where you're really holding title to the company. Are you going to have whatever privileges it goes with? And even then, it may be whether you're Class A or Class B. But people don't typically look at options as a way to get a hold of a company and vote. Okay, it's really almost purely used for compensation in order to hand people money, and it lets the company dole out stuff and not have to burn as much cash in order to hand out the compensation. They're essentially handing out equity to the company, and then when you exercise it, they're able to collect that. I'm trying to look at what's on my list. We covered a lot of stuff here. Now, I don't know how many of you are out there and have access to equity and stuff, but it's really, there's a lot to study there, and then you can sit there and chat a lot. It's really tense because I can remember stuff like it was years ago when I'd had options or something, and I was like, cool. I'm sitting there and it's like my vestige date is almost here. I'm getting closer, and it's like the price is going up, and I'm going to sell on this day because I needed some cash. I didn't like the stress of like, is it going to work? And then it seems like right about here. Now this was years ago, but something like the tanks in Russia rolled into Crimea or something. Something world politics or something took. And everybody, there was panic in the markets, and the market did this. And like right before it got to my date, it like dipped, and I'm like, I'm not exercising today. The stock price can take a hit for stuff that seemingly has nothing to do with the company. It's kind of like if the entire market drops 500 points or something like that in the S&P 500, your company can be swept up in that. So there's something to be aware of with options in that it can make you tense and jittery. You can sit there and try to hold on, but you don't know. You only know the past. You don't know where it's going to go. So you're like, well, is it going to do this? Is it going to go down a little and then come up? So should I ride that out, or is it going to go down and keep going down? It would have been better to stop here than here. And this is why I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is what you have to decide. But I want you to be aware that there's tension in this, because you're sitting there trying to guesstimate your best move in saving in how am I going to get out of this stuff? And so sometimes you need to make a decision ahead. You need to choose and say, this is what I do at times. I just say, on that day, I'm going to sell, as long as especially with the RSUs, it becomes simple. I'm going to sell this many RSUs on this day, or I've got this thing I need to go pay for. I want to pay off my car loan. And if I sell that lot right now, I'm going to have the cash to pay that loan off. And when you sell, I always would, whenever I would sell, I'd always get that kind of mixed feeling of, did I make as much as I could have? What if I'd held on? There's always this doubt that comes with it. And sometimes it's good to sell it, and then I'm going to take the money and pay off this auto loan. And that way I'm not paying this off anymore. And maybe if I'm super shrewd, I'm going to take the payment I was making on the auto loan and just stockpile it in a savings account, something like that. So I want to share with you so you can understand what is about equity, what is about equity grants and options that's so harrowing, and to understand it really is just a form of compensation your company is handing you. It's a way for them to align your interests with their interests so that you're working together on building a more effective company. And it's a way for them to compensate you. And in order to take full advantage of it, you need to read the whole contract. You need to read all of it, understand the terms, and you can go share it with your accountant or your tax attorney or what have you, and just to make sure you understand everything so that you can be fairly compensated. And as a pro coder, it's vital. Okay. So now I want you to go out there and be professional.
This episode is over, but your code writing journey continues. Visit procoder.io to find links and resources to help you become a pro coder.